So I think everyone else will sort of still trickle in while we go along. But hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining and welcome to this webinar in our Green Shoot series. We're very excited to have you all present today. It's, I think, the eighth Green Shoots series webinar that we're hosting, and it's all been with people from WildE. And because in these webinars, we highlight the diversity of research and talent that we have as part of this project, WildE, that you can see on the screen, particularly focusing on some of the early career researchers that we have here in this project. So quickly as a reminder, what is WildE? Well, WildE is a project funded by the European Union that looks at rewilding as a climate smart solution to both the climate and biodiversity crisis. In this project, we look at climate smart rewilding at 8 different sites across Europe, assessing the rewilding approach in each of these sites. And in this project, we really have a great team of researchers from all over Europe. Today, we actually have people from Denmark, a lot of people from Denmark, but we have people from all over Europe working on different things. And in this webinar series, we present our work, and we are looking forward to continue to showcase the work that we are doing and also the diversity of work that comes out of this project. And with that, I'm very, very excited to announce the speakers for our webinar today. With us are Wanben Wu and Rob Buitenwerf, both from Aarhus University. And among other things, they work on the impact of disturbances on biodiversity and drivers of change in vegetation. After the presentation, we will have plenty of time for your questions and interaction. So please, if you have any questions during the presentation, just put them in the chat, and then we will address those at the Q&A later in the session. Do note that we are recording this webinar and will also be posted online afterwards in case you would like to rewatch it or share it. But to start this webinar off, Wanben, the floor is yours. Please take it away.
Okay, thank you, team, and hi, everyone. Good morning from Aarhus, and thanks for the introduction and for the project, of course, and for talk today. So today I will share some works here in the widely working with a team in Aarhus University, and the topic is mainly about light, variability, and heterogeneity, and the relationship between the light and plant diversity. Also, we're talking something about vegetation structure patterns of change in Europe and how this change will relate to plant diversity or the consequences of the changes. So many divided by two papers, or we can say two projects, and then we could discuss about the insights from all these results. Yeah. Okay, so first one, we're talking about how light regimes organize plant diversity across spatial scales. So start from here because, of course, we know light is very important for productivity, for biodiversity of nitrogen, for, also could be good proxy of microclimates. And there's a fundamental question about how light will affect plant diversity, for example. A lot of people doing experiments, refined scales of local scales, and there are assumptions with linear positive effects of light variability, also this hump shape of effect. Also, the paper report new non-effects, for example. So the question about how light will shape plant diversity is actually not clear. And it could be a fundamental question we need to answer. So back to Europe, some basic. Oh, sorry, something is wrong with the slide. Sorry. Back to Europe, there is some basic background about vegetation structure in Europe, and also there are two studies from our group, ECONOVO. The first one is based on the pollen records, indicates before human activities or megafauna extinction, most of European landscape is actually open or semi-open habitat, or we can say it's more than 50% of landscape is the light or open canopy closure, canopy structure. Associated with this, there is another study like talking about like more than like 80% of European forest plants are associated with semi-open and open habitats or canopies. So this is actually like from the evolutionary perspective, like most plant species are still associated with open or semi-open habitats. But what happens like it's 1,000 years or many years before, like the first big contact could be like megafauna extinction. So with this megafauna extinction, like less disturbance with canopy and more canopy closure perhaps is happening from this reason. Also, there are like a big background of abandonment, agricultural abandonment in Europe. So this could also lead a way to more canopy closure or more density canopy. Also, there is the most sensor-driven analysis saying like using LAI as proxy, you can see the woody densification in the nature, semi-nature area across Europe. So all these signs or drivers could give us a sense, okay, is now still like good habitats, like consider about light availability or openness, still good for plant diversity. Yeah. So based on these big backgrounds, we want to test like first of all, how light regimes could explain the plant diversity distribution variations, for example. And then beyond like light availability as gradients of environmental gradients, we'll also think about this spatial heterogeneity could be potentially also important to contribute to explaining plant diversity patterns. And the third hypothesis will be related to the big background of this canopy closure or greening process or abandonment process. We'll think about, okay, current light regime could be different, or there's a mismatch between the high plant diversity light regime and the realistic light regime in Europe. So if we want to do that, what can we do? Like, first of all, we should measure light. The former result I showed you, like there's inconsistent results from light and plant diversity relationship is not consistent because most of the results are driven by experiment exercise or results will be very varies consider about context, consider about the design of the experiment. So what we want to do is like using more broad light availability data. So currently there is some measurement methods could be used, like can be openness driven by camera or even very fancy power sensors, or very fancy like radar data could even like could tell us like vegetation structure, the details of vegetation structure. But all this data is still like very limited if we want to think about more broad scale or extent, for example, pan-European analysis. So we turn to this indicators system called analog indicator system for Europe. So this system is actually give us a very simple like design based on plot data, like thinking, okay, if a specific species could survive here, then we'll give a score to a species like a niche. So, and then if we got plot data combined with plot data, we can kind of calculate like the light availability indicator for this plot scale. So we got plot data from, for example, from EVA, plot survey data, and then if we want still about like thinking about scaling up plot observations, then we kind of involve in like Earth observation data, for example, satellite images. So that's exactly what we have done. So we're basically using like more than 500,000 of vegetating plots and all these light indicators, and also like hundreds of thousands of Sentinel-1 and Sentinel-2 data or Terran data, also combined with random forest models. And the result told us like, okay, this is actually a very exciting result to show remote sensing data have this ability or potential to estimate light availability using this kind of process. I'll not give details about this, but you could see the observation result and the original light availability is actually associated very well. And based on this process, we achieved the first pan-European light availability estimation for nature and semi-nature area. And also, if we using a moving window process calculate the variations in local scale, we can also achieve like light heterogeneity in local scale. If we put the light availability and light heterogeneity in some specific case study area, for example, the rewilding area in Aarhus, and the disturbance area in Germany, and like the primary forest plantations. So you can see different texture of light availability, or you can say heterogeneity of light. Also, the certain gradient of light availability is quite different in different habitats or different contexts of disturbance. And then to test hypothesis one, we're using like spatial structure model, SDMTM model, and construct different models to think about, okay, how light availability and heterogeneity could contribute to explain the plant diversity variations. If we involve in like climate data and soil parameters, also the two light variables plot area, and you could see at plot scale or local scale, plot area is very important, but consider about light availability and heterogeneity is also comparable to like soil, some soil and some climate variables. Yeah. But it's very impressive. We could see like a landscape scale, light heterogeneity is the most important one. Yeah, contribute to explain the plant diversity variations. Yeah, when I'm talking about like landscape scale, is actually like 10-kilometer resolution grid scale, and local scale is like almost 1 pixel size. And when we turn to, okay, if we want to know how light availability or heterogeneity could affect plant diversity, we think about the passive effect. So light availability actually shows like a hump shape of this relationship. So high plant diversity could show up in quite kind of high light level, but not too high. And also light heterogeneity like generally show a positive patterns relationship to the plant diversity, but at different scales it shows quite associated results, but also slightly different. Consider about like, for example, light heterogeneity and landscape scale have like threshold, meaning limitations where it turns very high and then the plant diversity will become very stable, something like that. But before that, it's very positively related to the plant diversity, could contribute to improving the plant diversity, very like significant. Okay, start again. Yeah, so if we put these two dimensions together, think about liability and heterogeneity as two-dimension niche or environment, we can see is that it is actually shaping plant diversity very well by using two dimensions of light, not only like light availability as gradient, but also consider about the spatial heterogeneity. So we could see also associated with passive effects results. So the high plant diversity hotspot of plant diversity could show up in the middle of light availability and high level of heterogeneity. And this is the plot scale result, and this is a three landscapes result using different index or metrics for plant diversity, but they are all very associated with this kind of result. So this also like give us a impression like both light availability and heterogeneity is actually shaping plant diversity very well, but together, not separated. Okay, so if we think about, okay, we have detected like high plant diversity light regime using this two-dimension map. like top 10 plant, the high plant diversity regime, then we overlay with this like cover stage of light availability and heterogeneity regime at landscape scale, we could see like a really great or clear mismatch of the high plant diversity regime and the real light regime in Europe. So either we will push the light availability higher than that could mean we will generate more open canopy structure, or we push the heterogeneity higher, then we could achieve like bigger potential of this light plant diversity considered as a light regime perspective. And then we see, okay, why this could be happen like of this mismatch of the light regime and high plant diversity light regime. For example, when we consider about different forest management strategies, if we also using the same strategy using this two-dimension map and overlay with different forest management pixels, we could find out like, for example, close to nature tend to have like lower light availability and also lower heterogeneity compared to other combined objective or intensity of different management. But as we all know, that close to nature is also like very highlight and used very frequently in different countries for different purpose. But this could be also give us like another consideration about is that good for plant diversity or high potential plant diversity considered about light. So some take-home message, okay, animal indicator and remote sensing could have potential to wall-to-wall light availability and heterogeneity estimation. And light is not only light regime, like combine both a gradient of light and heterogeneity of light could be more potential to describe plant diversity. And also we think about this mismatch of light availability and consequence for diversity. So there's another research also it's very different perspective thinking about like a landscape scale. So because we all know like farmland abandonment is actually a big background in big context in Europe. So for example, the statistical results using remote sensing could tell us like almost 25% of farmland have experienced fallow, and it's very intensely distributed in east part of Europe, for example. So here we did a very simplified method to think about landscape scale. We talk about 1 kilometer, for example. Think about, okay, what about the tree cover, the tree connectivity and heterogeneity dynamics, like from 2001, 2021, in different areas, the patterns of these changes, and also the drivers, especially like how farmland abandonment could contribute to these changes. So basically, we develop like triangle of these assessments using tree cover, like the coverage among the grid size, 1 kilometer, and tree connectivity, they consider about age effects, isolation effects, and the mean patch effects. Also consider about like the heterogeneity structure, mainly using like tree height as input data, and also spatial heterogeneity using KNVI. And then we find out like tree cover increasing very sharply here in this part of Europe, also like in Spain, Italy. But when combine those modes together, like cover, connectivity, and heterogeneity together, we find the most biggest area of friction area of the change could be like increasing of cover and increasing of connectivity, but decreasing of heterogeneity, structure heterogeneity and structure heterogeneity. So this could give us a sense, okay, it's kind of a landscape scale, it's more unification, but landscape heterogeneity become lower or become more homogeneous. And then we're using machine learning model to explain the contribution of each factors, for example, different management forest management intensity and protected area or disturbance, like Wi-Fi, droughts, all these factors is actually very important to explain the patterns of tree structure change at landscape scale. But we also find out like former cropland fiction, like proxy of abandonment, contribute a lot to improving, increasing of forest cover and connectivity, but negative associated with heterogeneity increasing. That could give us a sense like abandonment could lead a more heterogeneous, a more density of canopy closure or multiplication, but less heterogeneity of habitat. And as a very short update is actually is ongoing work. We're thinking about, okay, we know landscape change and light availability is still important. Why not doing something about the dynamic of light? So we did something similar process using Landsat data and did something light availability assessments from 1990 to 2020. So we find out it gives us very similar concern about vilification. For example, you only think about the stable forest extent area, like using land use data or land cover data as mask. You could also see very similar pattern as a landscape scale analysis. This is 30-meter resolution data. So it also give us like overall in Europe, this area have experienced like darkening change, something about light decreasing. And in this part of Europe, it's even more, like more than 60% of this area have experienced canopy closure, or if we're using light availability as proxy. So some take-home message, like we all know, European area landscape have gained tree cover, but lost structural heterogeneity, and also tree cover expands primarily associated with farmland abandonment, nature growth. And also forest structure dynamics shows strong region contrast across Europe. So as I said, the hotspot of area experience this pattern could be many in east of Europe. They experience like depopulation, abandonment, this kind of process. And our big concern could be like structural homogenization may negatively affect plant diversity. So it's also associated with what are the concern like based on a light regime analysis. So that's all from my side of the presentation, and welcome to more discussion and questions. Yes.
Thank you so much, Wanben. Very, very interesting. Rob, you know this research a little bit more as well. Would you be able to kick us off in the discussion with some questions to Wanben?
I can try. And yes, I'm involved in this research, so I hope also that I can say something about it. But yeah, thanks, Wanben, for this very interesting presentation. And so I wanted to maybe start with linking the two studies that you presented. In the first study, you show that environments that have less shading, so more light availability, and environments that are more heterogeneous in their light availability can support more species, right? So in other words, open landscapes or partly open landscapes, mosaics, vegetation patterns tend to accommodate more species, right? And then in the second study, you show that when we look at tree cover, at least, many parts of Europe are on this trajectory of increasing woody canopy cover and actually a decline in the heterogeneity of the tree cover. And so the first question is, so based on that, what is your expectation for plant species diversity in those areas that are experiencing darkening, you could say, and a reduction in the heterogeneity of the light or shading environment?
I think basically the heterogeneity and diverse relationship is actually very accessible for all ecologists. So it also from a light regime perspective, like most of the plant species are associated with open or light canopy structure. So it's also like from evolutionary perspective, it also could be a big concern if like forests become darker or canopy become closure and the landscape become more homogeneous. So it could be a big concern about that. But thinking from like the way or method strategy to do restoration or protection, like from the rewilding perspective, there could be like two ways of rewilding. Like one is like passive rewilding, think about abandonment, more related to the second study. So this process could lead like more potential of nature comeback or vegetation succession and wood identification. But also, I also want to say, okay, traffic rewilding could be a good way to maintain the habitat more open and heterogeneity. So this could be like good combination, a good way to increase in the potential of plant diversity, like keep the habitat more open and more heterogeneity. Yeah, high heterogeneity.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, you are saying that in those areas that experiencing vegetation succession and darkening and homogenization, we should expect to maybe lose species or at least not gain species when it comes to plants. And then you already started linking this to rewilding, right? That's actually what's going to be my follow-up question, because we are in a project that essentially is about rewilding. And then you already mentioned these two kind of forms, you could say, of rewilding: passive rewilding, and then active or trophic rewilding. And so maybe we can talk a little bit more about these two types of rewilding, because actually their implications, at least when we link this to your results here, might be quite different, right? From like if we are in a passive rewilding scenario versus a trophic rewilding scenario. So maybe you can share your thoughts a little bit more on how these two kinds of rewilding relate to what you find here.
Because basically, like in Europe, there is a lot of abandoned land, and we call it a passive rewilding. That we done nothing there. We will not plant anything there. So it's basically like nature succession. So, but some area maybe still have potential to have like exposure to disturbance like fire or different kind of disturbance. Then in this kind of case, there is still a high potential, like maintain still like nature back, but also the habitat is still like have potential to be open and high heterogeneity. But some area maybe don't have this kind of chance to exposure to some disturbance. Then that could be involving like traffic rewilding. This combination could be a good chance like to improving the potential of plant diversity or even different or taxonomy diversity is also possible. So I think it's like very context based. So if we have the chance, like we know the area experience abundance, and then we want to do something to improve in the potential plant diversity or other biodiversity perspective, then it could be a good combination of those areas of abundant lands and traffic rewilding. So this could be my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I agree. It's a very interesting thought to think about. On the one hand, this land abandonment and passive rewilding is, of course, a huge opportunity for nature, right? Because we are using the land less intensively. But then at the same time, one can wonder if we are reaching the full potential, if we don't also restore these disturbance regimes that you mentioned, and that then can create this type of heterogeneous vegetation and landscapes that can accommodate more species. Okay, so I don't know, Tim, just interrupt when we should move on to the next stage. Otherwise, I can ask another question.
I think one final question will be good, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, okay, good. So in one of your last slides, you showed this interesting graph about comparing different forest management strategies, and you highlighted the one that's called close to nature forestry. And that's a type of forestry that does not do big clear cuts, right? And the idea is that this results in a higher biodiversity, but at the same time So what it is essentially is more selective type logging, but at the same time, a goal in close to nature forestry is to always keep the canopy closed, right, and to not allow gaps. And so the consequence of that, and what you show here, is that in close to nature forestry, we actually have the lowest light levels and the lowest heterogeneity in light levels across all the forest management types. So just, I mean, maybe just to hear your thoughts on how, I mean, how the kind of the idea of that this is a close to nature type of forestry then actually relates to what the implications of this forestry management type are for plant diversity, or could be for plant diversity.
I think here, as you know, we didn't do too much about exploration about this, like combined with real data of like plant diversity among this close nature and other management. But you could also notice like the close nature still have very similar standards comparing to our management forest. I mean, this could also be something because some area have their own context with a high species pool, for example, in this area, then maybe there are already lots of like shading adapted like species, for example. But if not, if it is initially like open habitat, then you want to using this strategy to do something close to nature protection or management, then maybe it could be harmless for plant diversity if it is not if it's not like have the species pool associated with shading. Then from the light availability analysis, then it could be a disaster for species. But we didn't do too much analysis, you know. But I mean, this could be also a really good direction to explore more about how different forest management will associate with different structure and light, and then plant diversity. I think that's also on our list, right? So maybe.
Yeah, no, definitely, I agree. I mean, there is more to explore here, and but it's certainly very interesting to see that unmanaged forests, after all, are the lightest forests compared to all production type forests. And then the second interesting thing here is that out of the production forest, the close to nature one is actually the darkest forest in the end, right? And so essentially, likely has the lowest capacity to essentially host diverse plant communities. So there's something interesting there. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Very interesting indeed. And we would love to hear some of the opinions and thoughts of the people also attending. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat. But first, for the next session, we'll be using a online tool called Mentimeter. If you haven't used Mentimeter before, it's very easy to use and you won't need an account or anything to sign in. So just use your laptop or your smartphone, go to the website menti.com and enter the code that's on the screen. And then we'll have a few questions to sort of try to hear your opinions and thoughts on some of the things that have been discussed today. So I'll give you a few minutes to please sign on, and then we will go to some of the questions.
Yes, thank you.
So while the people are signing in and coming in, some of these questions will be coming on. Wanben and Rob, can I ask you to sort of talk through this, to see whether some of the points that are coming in here, we're already getting people saying, I don't think increasing tree cover poses major ecological risks. We are having people giving other opinions. What is your thoughts on if you're seeing these different, quite a wide range of different opinions coming in?
Sorry, Tim, could you repeat the question?
So here on the screen, I'm seeing basically quite a wide range, right? We have 2, 1 answers for all of them. People are answering some of the things. What do you see as some of the biggest ecological risk? You're posing this question, you're seeing some of these answers coming in. Do you agree with the audience, or do you think something different?
I mean, I can start, and I mean, I can say it's actually interesting to see that we kind of yeah. So there is increased wildfire risk. So that's interesting. That this is, of course, I mean, I'm guessing that some people that are saying that are based in Southern Europe, right, where this is, of course, definitely very much a thing. Less important in other parts of Europe. I mean, risk is maybe well, it's an interesting word, right? It kind of suggests danger, and that could be on the strong side. I mean, on the one hand, like we just discussed with Wanben, you know, land abandonment and passive rewilding, regrowth of natural vegetation. I mean, generally can be thought of as a good thing if the starting point is a plowed field, right? I mean, so I think it's not so difficult to agree on that. But then there is an interesting question that if we then let that process go without restoring natural disturbance regimes that have been present in these ecosystems for essentially millions of years, right? Then in many parts of Europe, on most soils, we end up with a closed canopy forest. And then the results that Wanben shared earlier show that if you are in that situation with the closed canopy forest, there are simply many plant species, the large majority of plant species that just you know are not compatible with those kinds of habitat conditions, and so that raises a question, right? So that would be interesting to debate, I guess, a little bit here.
For certain, something we can definitely go into in the Q&A. So if you are one of those fives that have answered that question, please, we would love to hear your opinion a little bit later on as well. Could we go to the next question? So this question is about what do you think is currently missing most in many of the European forests? And we would love to hear that, whether it's wildlife or whether you think it's more open habitats, structural diversity.
And how is it with this question? Can people give multiple answers here, or does everyone have
There's
to?
only one answer that is possible, so you really have to make a choice here. There's no middle ground. Van Ben, I can see here that there's quite a lot about old growth characteristics. People that are saying that that is clearly a dominant one that is missing. What do you think about this?
I mean, the old growth is actually is typical missing in pan-European scale. So we don't have too much like old growth. For example, primary forests in Europe, for example.
So would you agree that this would maybe be the thing that's missing the most?
I mean, what I raising this question is actually think about is from the management perspective, or what can we do for the existing forests for old growth characteristics? Maybe it's also related to like okay, structure heterogeneity, for example, or different layers of forest structure. So I think it's actually maintain all this like for the quality of good forest or healthy. That could be a next question. I think about what could be good forest or healthy forest structure or system. Yeah, I think, but I think it's quite associated with what I'm expected. Yeah. Also,
Yeah, well,
nature disturbance. Yeah. So because this is actually associated with the topic I'm talking about, light. So that's why I'm highlighting. Okay, if we thinking from the perspective of carbon stock, for example, maybe more forest would be better. But if we think about like the potential risk or consequence of the structure change or darkening change, maybe we should also highlight like we need some disturbance from human beings or from nature or from traffic rewilding process, for example. I think all these answers actually very linked. So it's actually depend on what you think about that. Yeah.
I agree. I mean, there's potentially some overlap between the categories here, but I would be super interested to hear what people have in mind when thinking about old growth characteristics, because there could be quite many things, and that would be interesting to hear.
Yes.
I would have answered a different one, but can tell you later.
Let's move to the last question then, so that we can also have to have some of this discussion. So this is a bit more of an open question. So here we would like to give you if you could give very short responses. What are the characteristics that define a healthy forest landscape to you?
Yeah, would also like to see the result. Lots of birds, resilience.
So I'm seeing things like resilience coming through, uh, heterogeneity, diversity in some of those aspects, but also things more associated with yeah, species, right? And red listed specialist species, lots of birds, maybe even around this deadwood and such like that. What are what are your thoughts when you're seeing this come in, Bob?
I think this actually answers the question from Rob, like what is an old characteristic, old forest characteristics? That's actually is the answer here. So think about like diversity of structure and more high resilience, rich diversity or rich tree or herb diversity. So these are actually all characteristics for this old growth or old forest characteristics. Yeah. Height, height diversity, yes, structure diversity, light, rich in the forest floor. Yeah, it's actually very associated with our analysis or like talking about light is very important. Environmental factors.
Yeah.
Old trees, standing dead wood is also related to structure heterogeneity or diversity, but more than that. Yeah, I'm
It's very interesting to see
all this. So this basically answers the question of, okay, we don't only need more tree cover, but we should also concern about the structure heterogeneity or the openness of canopy. Yeah, so it is actually very associated with our expectation.
I mean, there is something here on the definition of forest, right? And it could be interesting to kind of think about whether we all have the same definition in mind when we think about forest, and kind of related to that, to also think about whether what we have in mind when we think about forest is close to the evolutionary baseline that our European ecosystems and landscapes have evolved in. And I mean, one can debate that a little bit. I'll put a recent article in the chat here that Wanben also showed a figure out of. It's a review to try and think about what the vegetation state and structure and the main drivers of vegetation dynamics in Europe have been for many millions of years up until quite recently when humans arrived on the scene. And we come to the conclusion that perhaps forest is not the best term to describe what this vegetation has been for a very long time, and we end up with the term mosaic or woodland grassland mosaic as perhaps a better way of describing what this vegetation looked like in many parts of Europe.
Interesting. And let's I see some questions coming in. So James, if we could close this. Um, there's some of the main questions here, but James, I'm not sure if it's possible to give people also the opportunity to speak, particularly for some of these topics we've talked before, if that's there. But before first question that I have here is from Arndt, and it's first as a compliment, impressive data sets and analysis, but at which spatial scale do you consider heterogeneity in your analysis? And Wanben, what will be your expectations if your analysis could consider other skills? I think I'll ask this question to you, Wanben.
Hi, Anne. Thanks for your question. Actually, we already consider about two scales. Like one is plot scale. So we think about like plot scale heterogeneity is using like moving window 50-meter radius, so it's like 100-meter fishnet, something like that. So we call it a local scale heterogeneity. And also we're thinking about a landscape scale in more broad scale, 10-kilometer resolution. So I actually showed some results from the contribution of light, where BT heterogeneity could contribute to the model explanation. Very different, but the partial effect of light variability and also heterogeneity of plant diversity is actually very associated. And also this two-dimension interface map, it also showed that. So we did try like two very different scales. I don't know if this answers the question, but we could discuss more of this project.
And what is the temporal scale you think would be most relevant to assess, especially the long-term impacts of light availability on plant composition? Right? Especially given that passive rewilding leads to landscape homogenization before leading to higher ecological maturity and richness. This is a question asked by Clara. Right?
This is really good question, but I don't know if I cannot answer. Maybe Rob can add up. So I think for nature, succession could be like 40 years, even 50 years. You see the whole process of this regrowing from grassland to shrubland to forest or woody cover. And also, I think it is possible doing something like this. I think maybe you or some of you saw there was a publication also using indicator values also and ever plot data and think about like not only the light availability but also nitrogen change shift from 1960. So they also find like this density or darkening trend using the plot data. So. But from the remote sensing perspective, we could do something from 1990 or 1985, something like that, to see the changes. I'm not sure I get the question like properly, like think about tempo. You mean like how long it could be a reasonable tempo analysis, think about the succession process?
I mean, maybe one thing that I could add is that the way in which we quantify the light environment here is actually through the composition of the plant community, right? So we look at the plant community, we know their Ellenberg indicator values for light, and then we take the average value for indicator for light across that community. And so somehow what you measure there is already the outcome of a process that has happened beforehand, right? So it's somehow it's a snapshot observation of which plant community is there, but of course that plant community being there is the outcome of processes that has happened in the past, right? Of course, we don't know the rates of these processes necessarily, but just to say that there is already kind of a longer temporal scale implicit to the measurement, I would say. I don't know. I'm also unsure if this exactly answers the question, but yeah.
And in terms of, I think the question goes a little bit also on, please, Clara, clarify if I'm misinterpreting this. But I think it goes a little bit, right, in the second that passive rewilding first leads to homogenization, but then over time, at a longer duration, you might get more ecological richness because you might get more old growth forest and all of those things that we've been talking about. Is that something you take into account? And here it says like yes, the succession process, but also because you mentioned the impact on plant community giving light availability. I'm also thinking of light dynamics between a pioneer forest versus a more mature forest.
Yeah.
I think it's very reasonable concern, but for example, if I don't know, it could be a good thought, but if you think extreme case, like all of this abundant become forest, or all the land become forest, like is that good for biodiversity? Because I don't know how we go to this direction, like focus on forests, but actually the light availability analysis is actually the nature assembly nature analysis. It's not only forests, it's actually involving grassland, pasture, and different kind of habitats also. So at a landscape scale, it's also like it's possible to think about is that mosaic kind of habitat, forest and non-forest habitats, mosaic, even croplands. So this kind of combination of mosaic habitat could be better for plant diversity, or different gradients. Think about like pure forest, or think about the difference of density forest or open forest. So there is different thoughts about this, but I tend to think like keep the forest more open and all heterogeneity. That could be a good direction from our perspective. Yes, Rob?
Yeah, just to say that if you think about the trajectory of starting in an open field, right? I mean, what you will see is a really fast decline of the light availability as woody plants come in, right? And then if you look 10 or 15 years later, you're probably at the darkest point, you could say, when there is lots of immature trees, right? And they're super dense. There hasn't been any thinning yet due to competition, because of competition. And then if you wait longer and competition kicks in and tree density decreases, you get a little bit of an increase in the light availability again in most cases, right? Just because there is less understory and there might be the occasional gap and stuff like that. So in a sense, I think if you just think about the relationship between light availability and species diversity, you could say that based on that prediction, a mature forest, which is a little bit lighter, as we also showed in the last graph that Wanben pulled up again, you should expect a little bit higher species diversity than in an early successional forest state, right? And I think, I mean, many plant ecologists would also kind of, know this from experience. So yeah, I think this kind of successional pathway is somehow consistent with our results. But I would still like to say again, right, that it's interesting to think about really what we mean with forest. And I think it's really important that we consider that many parts of Europe likely didn't look like mature forests in the sense that we think about them today for the longest time throughout evolutionary kind of history. So there's something quite important there.
Very interesting. And maybe related to that, we had some answers that were talking to the Mentimeter saying that expanding tree cover might not be such a problem, and we'll question about what do people consider old growth characteristics. Might there be someone who's present here who would like to explain some of their answers? If so, please put that in the chat there, and then we can unmute you and give you the opportunity to speak. Until then, there is a follow-up question here still that is that says that they wonder whether the dynamic you just described also depends on different biomes or different biome regions.
I think yes, it is because for the baseline, different biomes of structure and the drivers is also very different. That's why I'm highlighting something happening very abroad, widespread abandonment in East Europe, for example. It's not only like biome; it's also like consider about the like demographic change, population, or social economy drivers. Yeah, I think it's very context based in Europe about this change. Yeah.
Yeah, just to briefly supplement there, I mean, I agree that of course the dynamics vary between different biomes, but at the same time, if we look back in history, and I've put another paper here in the chat, actually another one that a graph from also showing based on the pollen records, what the kind of reconstructing historical vegetation states based on pollen, and there, at least from those parts of Europe that we have data for, which is quite large parts of Europe, the signals were quite consistent in the sense that you get this much higher proportion of species that are indicative of open or semi-open conditions in the previous interglacial, when we had large fauna, but no humans in similar climates. And so, so yes, I mean, biomes differ, of course, but the general pattern of less canopy closure, I think, is somehow consistent across the major European biomes.
I saw a question from Anne to think about like our management forest management show two regions of light regime. I think this is actually related to like biome or context based, because in Europe we have primary forests in northern Europe, like Sweden, and also in the Central Europe. So they have very different structural forest and light regime. So this could be explained. So let's not say okay, different management forests have very consistent light regime. So they have different like definition or different structure and even different species. So it's also, yeah, really good question and deserve more exploration. But these two rooms of light regime is based on different regions of light forest. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might be a geographical effect, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Very interesting, and thank you all for the questions. If you would have any additional questions, or if you would want to get in contact, I'm sure Wanben, Rob, I'm sure the people are more than welcome to send you an email if there's anything to follow up for
that would be
that.
cool. Yeah.
Well, I
I'm
can
very
see
open.
already people are excited about exploring your spatial data, so I'm sure hopefully there'll be some things coming up from this. Then I would like to thank everyone who was present here today for your questions, for your participations, and of course, Wanben and Rob, thank you for presenting. If you would like to know more about some of these results of WildE, then sign up for the newsletter where we share some of the results. Look at our website that has a lot of things, and now also a new rewilding hub with all sorts of information. And of course, follow any of our next webinars. Thank you so much for today. Really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Tim and James, for organizing. Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.